Why do we become so emotionally irrational and pendulum-like in our emotional control when we've not been getting enough sleep? Well, some years ago, we took a group of perfectly healthy individuals and we assigned them to either a sleep group or a sleep deprivation group. And then the next day, we placed them inside an MRI scanner and had them look at a range of emotionally challenging images. And we focused on a structure deep within the brain, a structure called the amygdala. And the amygdala is almost like the centerpiece region for the generation of strong emotional reactions. When we looked at those people who'd had a full night of sleep, there was a nice, controlled, modest degree of reactivity in the emotional amygdala center of the brain. But in those people who were sleep deprived, we saw this aggravated, amplified amygdala response. In fact, the amygdala was 60% more reactive when you'd not had a night of sleep. But then the question was why? Why does your emotional brain become so reactive when you'd not been getting enough sleep? And we discovered that there's another part of the brain that sits directly above your eyes called the prefrontal cortex. That part of the brain had lost its connection to those deep emotional brain regions. Why is that important? Well, it turns out that your medial prefrontal cortex acts like a regulatory brake on your deep emotional center so that you don't respond with excessive emotional reactions. And that connection between those two parts of the brain had been severed. And as a consequence, without sleep, you became too emotional accelerator pedal and too little rational control brake from the prefrontal cortex. Now, you may argue, well, that's one night of total lack of sleep. Most people are not pulling all-nighters. Well, a subsequent team in Japan replicated our findings, but now what they did was they took people and they just gave them 5 or 6 hours of sleep for 5 nights, mimicking what most people do during a working week. And they saw exactly that same profile of amplified, irrational, emotional reactivity due to a loss of the prefrontal cortex and its controlling, calming influence on the amygdala. All of which is to say that sleep is not only essential for things like learning and memory, it's critical for your emotional health. Sleep and a full night of sleep is emotional first aid. And without it, we're not quite our emotional, stable, rational Homo sapien selves.